Brian Norman Jr. just successfully defended his WBO welterweight title over in Japan with a brutal 5th round knockout victory over Jin Sasaki. That was Norman's second successful title defense. Norman put Sasaki down in the 5th for a clean one-punch KO win, but it was a dominant performance from Norman up until that point too. Now, this fight wasn't such a foregone conclusion going into it. We did all pick Norman Jr. to win, and he was a sizable favourite coming in against Sasaki, but Norman was nowhere near as much of a favourite as other world champions such as Jai Opetaia and Naoya Inoue have been going into their recent fights, and Norman was even a significantly smaller favourite than he was in his very last fight against Derek Cuevas. Sasaki is ranked highly in the Ring Magazine welterweight rankings. The fight was in Jin Sasaki's home country of Japan, so he would have wanted to show out for his fans, especially given that this is a welterweight world title fight, because despite the rich history of world-class Japanese boxing, Japan has never had a world champion in the 147-pound welterweight division, and a Japanese fighter has not even as much as challenged for the welterweight world title for over 35 years, since Fujio Ocasio challenged for the American Mark Breland's WBA welterweight title in Japan in 1989. And Ocasio got stopped by Breland in the 4th. So Jin Sasaki had some national and historical pressure on his shoulders going into this fight, so it wasn't a certainty that Norman was just going to smoke him and clean him out, but quite frankly, that is exactly what happened. Alright, so Sasaki came out tot at the start of the very first round in Japanese warrior fashion, but his early eagerness led to no success as Norman quickly had him shook off the feints. And within the first half of that very first round, Brian Norman dropped Sasaki twice. The first time Norman caught Sasaki with a left hook to the top of the head as Sasaki went to go to the body. This was an equilibrium type shot that made Sasaki lose his footing and literally bounce across the ring. For the second knockdown, Sasaki was lunging in and swinging, and it was a right hand to the top of the head that sent Sasaki down that time. Although Sasaki didn't look crazy hurt, he was dropped twice within the first minute and a bit of the fight, and his head was probably scrambled. And he wasn't looking too good at all in terms of how he was boxing. So at this point, we were like, yeah, this kid is done. But all things considered, Sasaki fought back quite well for the remainder of the first round after being dropped twice. But of course, Norman still looked dangerous and the much better fighter, so it was a matter of time for the next few rounds to come. Round 2, Norman was just teeing off on Sasaki, just wailing on him with big hooks. He wasn't going crazy for the stoppage, but the shots were just there for him. Norman definitely hurt Sasaki to the body at one point in the round 2 with a nice right hook, and the round had a really nice ending when Sasaki brought the heat to Norman, which led to a fierce exchange. And by the way, Sasaki is one of those tough Japanese guys who does bring the heat. He was giving Norman work for sure, but Norman just looked a way better boxer and didn't have to do too much else than tuck up and pick his shots, because Sasaki is a bit scatty, bit of a leaky defense. A lot of these Japanese guys can be tough and gritty but not overly tidy with the boxing. Now round 3, Norman hurt Sasaki early in the round. Sasaki actually clipped Norman with a really nice left hook himself, but because he opened up so much to throw it, he got caught with 2 hard shots back from Norman. And then Sasaki shelled up, crouched and got his guard up, which showed that he was in jeopardy. And Norman was just teeing off again. Norman was pretty much beating Sasaki around for the whole round, and there was a strange mix of body language on display from Sasaki. He was crouching really low a lot of the time with his head leaning forward, and at times he'd either back up looking really hurt, but it was weird the way he was doing it, as if he was playing possum or something, despite the fact that he was actually hurt. And he was also trying to, psych himself up at times, giving a bit of bravado. It was kind of easy work for Norman at this point, but if I had one criticism to make, he probably should have been going to the body a bit more than he was, with Sasaki's guard being so high. More commitment to the body shots likely would have got Sasaki out of there earlier from where I stand. Not that it would go on to matter in the end, but either Norman was kind of playing with his food here or his punch selection isn't the greatest right now. Round 4, same again, Norman just kind of beating on Sasaki. Sasaki still showing heart and swinging back, but it was one-sided. Again, not that it would go on to matter in the end at all, but Norman was low-key headhunting a bit here. When he did start to go to the body in the last minute of the round, Sasaki got all close and started smothering Norman's work like he hadn't done before in the fight, so I don't think Sasaki liked it to the body at all. But yeah, it would not matter because round 5 would be the round of the one-hitter-quitter finish. Norman landed a nice jab to the body, then Sasaki threw one back, and when Sasaki was coming back up from squatting down to throw his body jab, Norman caught him with a nasty left hook to the chin that literally flattened Sasaki. The ref would begin to count, but no count was needed. And Norman bowed to each side of the Japanese crowd in cold fashion. Not the first time we've seen a cold KO celebration from Norman. We saw such a thing in that crazy fight with Santillan, in which Norman won the interim belt last year. It's scenes when B-Norm moves like that, to be fair. It was worrying scenes for Jin Sasaki though, after being on the receiving end of that KO of the year contender. So we pray that he is okay, of course. He had to be stretched out, unfortunately. So what's next for Brian Norman Jr. after the win? Well, the welterweight division, the division he is currently a world champion in of course, is now completely shaken up because the unified WBA and IBF champ Boots Ennis just officially announced his move up to super welterweight, 154. So Boots will be vacating both belts. Those titles will now be contested for in vacant title fights. Or the IBF one definitely will, but Rolly Romero might just get upgraded to WBA super champ, who knows. And the WBC champion Mario Barrios is defending his belt against a 46-year-old Manny Pacquiao next month, and Barrios doesn't seem too fussed about unifications at all. So it's looking very unlikely for Brian Norman Jr. to be in a unification fight next as far as I see it. And for the Boots Ennis stuff, look, there are people on one side saying that Brian Norman Jr. originally ducked unification with Boots Ennis several months back to then defend his belt against Derek Cuevas for way less money than what he was offered by Boots' promoter Eddie Hearn to unify with Boots. And on the other side, you've got people saying that Boots just moved up to 154 to duck Brian Norman Jr. After the win over Sasaki just now, Norman Jr. dropped a little line in his post-fight interview saying, "When the storm is coming, you grab your boots and run." Yeah? You grab your boots and run. Okay? And Norman Sr. started marking out. So here's the thing. I like the Normans. And the narrative about the offer that was made to Brian Norman Jr. to unify with Boots before Boots went to unify with Stanionis instead, after Norman ducked Boots because he is not ready yet, mainly comes from the words of Boots Ennis' own promoter Eddie Hearn, who would have made the offer. Eddie Hearn is a snake oil salesman, so I don't want to take his word for gospel. But from what I understand to be true about this situation, from all the interviews that I've listened to from many parties, including the Normans themselves, the Normans are coming across a bit ridiculous here. From my understanding, Norman Jr. didn't want to unify his newly won full WBO title that he was yet to defend against the IBF champ Boots Ennis, as he felt that the Boots fight was a fight too soon, despite Norman being a whole world champion. But the Boots fight was probably one that he wanted down the line. But as for Boots, everyone knew he was killing himself to make 147 and was constantly talking about moving up to 154. Everyone knows that. So you've got to unify with Boots ASAP. But Norman Jr. felt that he'd ease in with a couple of title defences before unifying with the main man of the division, Boots Ennis. He didn't want to roll the dice and take the risk to fight him now. But then Boots just said F it and moved up to 54 because he couldn't make 147 anymore. He was making the sacrifice to try and become a unified champion, but it became uncertain whether or not the other champions at 47 would actually unify with him, so why waste any time? And then the Normans used that as an opportunity to say that Boots is moving up to 154 to duck Brian Norman Jr., despite the fact that Norman literally had the chance to fight Boots in a unification already. That's a baby thing. Again, this is just from the information that I know. I'm not on social media at all, and perhaps I'm guilty of consuming more content from people who are on the side of Boots Ennis on this YouTube space, but I have been listening to a lot of Brian Norman Sr. on Mill City Boxing, and I respect that he's going to defend his son and all that, but nothing that Norman Sr. has been saying has reduced my belief that they ducked a unification with Boots Ennis several months back. And as you can clearly hear, I'm not an American, so it's not a thing for me where, you's a Boots fanboy, or you's a Brian Norman Jr. hater, man. I assure you, I'm not either of those things. I like both fighters, but again, from my understanding of the situation, Brian Norman Jr. ducked that unification with Boots. And the Normans now want to use Boots' name for clout, now that Boots has officially left the division, spinning the narrative that Boots ducked him. And you've even got Norman Sr. continuing on about Boots backstage after the Sasaki fight just now. But he's backing his son in it, so it's fair play. If the Normans want to use Boots' name to build up hype, then do what you got to do, I guess. But all that ultimately matters here is that Norman and Boots are definitely not fighting each other next, so we're looking elsewhere when it comes to who B Norm is fighting next. Also, please do let me know if I have the whole Norman vs Boots situation twisted, or if there's a major part that I'm missing out here. Didn't mean to go off that much about all the Boots stuff, so yeah. To focus on what's actually next for Brian Norman Jr. after the win over Sasaki, well, the WBO number 1 at 147 right now is Alexis Rocha, who's coming off of a draw with Raul Curiel. But the WBO haven't ordered Rocha as a mandatory for Norman yet, so yeah, Norman has no mandatory as of right now. Okay, so funnily enough, shortly before this fight with Sasaki, maybe like a day before, some static built up online between Devin Haney and Brian Norman Jr. So could Haney be next for Norman Jr.? I say funnily enough because in my recent video, which weight class is most likely to have an undisputed champion next, I was also predicting who would be most likely to be an undisputed champion next in each division if there was going to be one. And for the welterweight division, I was going to put the unified champion Boots Ennis of course, but the official announcement of his move up to 154 was announced while I was in the middle of making that video, which really threw a spanner in the works there. So off an absolute whim, I then picked Devin Haney as the most likely to become the undisputed welterweight champion next, on the off chance that the division is going to see an undisputed champ anytime in the near future. Again, it was purely off a whim, as Haney's move up to 147 hasn't been so certain yet, despite him being the number 1 in the WBC welterweight rankings. His welterweight debut against Ramirez last month was at a catchweight. He's the WBC champion in recess at 140 still, I think. And there's been no real talk of potential welterweight opponents for Devin Haney next up. But after me randomly picking Haney as the most likely for undisputed status at 147, hype started to build for a potential fight between Devin Haney and Brian Norman Jr. for the WBO World Welterweight title, which is good stuff. They should just put the fight on. We know Devin Haney is versatile with the matchmaking, as he doesn't belong to any promoter, so it should be easy to make. Come on now. Devin Haney challenging for Brian Norman Jr.'s belt in his first welterweight world title fight. Let's just have it. If Norman's ready, of course. No, I'm just joking. But yeah, I like Brian Norman Jr. and he's still an up-and-coming fighter who is making improvements. So perhaps Top Rank just want to match him up in standard voluntary WBO title defenses like his last 2 fights were to build him up or whatever. But the guy's a full world champion, so I ain't got the patience for that personally. I know we ain't getting Norman versus Boots, because Boots move up to 154 to duck him, of course. Norman versus Mario Barrios is looking highly unlikely. So right now, based on what's happened very recently, I'm just set on Brian Norman Jr. versus Devin Haney. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you reckon that Brian Norman's KO of Jin Sasaki today will end up winning KO of the year? Do you want to see Norman versus Haney next? What's your thoughts on the Brian Norman Jr. and Boots Ennis situation? And what did you think about that mad co-main event today between Sora Tanaka and Takeru Kabata? Early stoppage? Comment about all of that down below, like and subscribe, and you have been listening to O.M.E. Boxing.